All right. Well, welcome everyone to 1881 series on the rocks, Rye, the Real American Spirit. My name is Josh Proulx from the Alumni Relations Office here at UConn, and I'm thrilled to be your host once again as we tackle our fifth unique spirit in this series. Tonight is all about Rye Whiskeys, so we're excited to have you here. As I mentioned just a minute ago, get those whiskeys into those glasses and let's open those suckers up so that we can get them right where we want them when it's time. Before we get started tonight, a couple quick things to help you maximize your participation with us. First, closed captioning is available, and should you wish to utilize this service, please visit your Zoom toolbar and select the CC option and activate your subtitles. My colleague, Samantha Morris-Avery, is joining us this evening, and she just dropped that into the chat function there. So if you need that, please go ahead and activate those. Tonight, we are going to do our best to make sure that we educate you in all things rye and all things whiskey, but we'll do our very best there. So if you have questions tonight, we are asking that you drop those into the Q&A section on your toolbar. If you look at your Zoom toolbar, you have a whole bunch of options down there. In order to make sure we don't miss anything, please make sure those go in there. And for those of you that have participated with us in the past during our 1881 events, you know that these are social, they're fun, they're exciting. And it's an opportunity for you really to meet other Huskies across the country or across the globe for that matter, that have similar passions or want to learn about spirits and whiskey just like you do. So it's a great opportunity. Drop your favorite cocktail in there, drop your favorite type of whiskey, or maybe the most expensive dram you've ever had poured for yourself and shelled out some dollar bills for. We'd love to hear that. But more importantly, we want to know where you guys are all dialing in from. So if you can, drop into the chat, let us know where you're calling in from, where you're logging in from tonight. It's always fun to see where folks are coming from. And for those, like I said, for those of you that are going to have questions tonight, please just make sure those go into the Q&A section, because that chat piece can really take up and go off pretty quickly. So just make sure you do that so we can streamline it. To kick us off, though, let's see here. Let's see what else do I have here for us tonight. All right, let's get started. Tonight, we are joined by an alum who is best known to whiskey drinkers worldwide at this point, having been a destination for single barrel selections from customers in almost every state in the country. Just ask her to show you her map board of where people are from, and she will be glad to do so. She has people coming from all over the country, all over the globe to come and taste her whiskey selections. And as she told me just before we got on today, since she's opened her doors, she's had approximately 75 single barrel selections of spirits since she's opened her doors. And she's actually logging in today from Quechee, Vermont to talk to us about her latest Whistle Pig selection from Whistle Pig Distillery itself. So whether it's bourbon, rye, scotch, or beyond, our guest tonight has quickly become a go-to for whiskey blending and flavor profile identification. And as her store social media presence shows and says, she's a certified whiskey sommelier, armed with a discerning palate and a nose that knows, and someone who can help you with your whiskey adventures. So it's my pleasure to welcome this incredible resource on spirits to our 1881 on the Rock stage tonight. Please join me in welcoming Irene Tan of Whisky Mentors and Canterbury Liquors. Irene, I know we've been chatting for a few minutes prior to kicking things off tonight, but welcome. Thank you for taking some time to be with us here. I'm excited. I know we chatted a lot about it, but thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Josh. This is perfect timing. When we talk about doing Rye, and I'm like, if you can push it out to July, I'm going to be at Whistle Pig. So just arrived about 1 o'clock today, and a little two-night stay at the farm. This is something that Whistle Pig, unlike any other distilleries out there, at least in the U.S. that I know of, that would actually do that. And tomorrow at 10 o'clock, I get to hopefully pick some single barrels, maybe blend some and taste some really fun stuff. So
well, that's awesome. And I think, I speak for everybody. And as the things that you just walked around and showed me just before we got on here, I am incredibly jealous. And I know that if we told everybody all the wonderful things that Whistle Pig does for its longtime customers, I'm sure that they'd be in the liquor business as well, just to get up there and experience what you have in front of you. So I think the other thing that's important tonight is I know how these tend to work for these events. Our folks are curious and excited to know what we're tasting and in what order, because let's be real, we're Huskies, so we're probably thirsty at this point in the evening. So Irene, can you walk us through which ones we should line up and in what order we're going to be tasting tonight?
Okay, so we're gonna go in the order, not so much of proof, but we're gonna go with the Wheelhorse Rye. And the reason I picked this rye is because I actually have 3 ryes over here that are of the same mash bill. If you've heard of MGP rye, if you know a little bit about whiskey at all, they always talk about MGP rye. MGP is out of Indiana. If I speak too fast, just slow me down. And so what they do is they're like a contract, rye maker. I mean, they make whiskey and they sell to other distilleries, some third-party stuff, which I'm not that happy about, but they do some of that. But so all three of these ryes that I have here, I don't know if you can see them, they're all 95.5. So what that means is to be a rye, you have to be 51% rye as a minimum for the recipe. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes with the new oak barrels and all that, which we're not talking about that.
So 51% was the number?
Yep.
All right.
51%, and then the rest can be anything, right? So what's fun is we have a few different ones today, but these are all three 95.5 rye expressions. And the reason I have them here is because, so to me, Wilhorse is a company called Latitude that's local to us in Rhode Island, and they managed to get their hands on some really, really nice MGP rye that they've blended, so that it has a really kind of unique and very consistent flavor. It's 101, 50.5, so yeah, it's 101 proof, and it's you can sip it by itself, and you can put it in a cocktail. And if you ask most bartenders, they always like a slightly higher proof spirit to make cocktails with, because it doesn't get lost in when you add ice and other things to it. So this one stands up really well. This is 95.5 rye from Colorado Springs, which I'm actually going to help them blend a distillery release only thing. It was really cool. Aspen wood is a softer wood, so you can't make a barrel out of it. So what they do is they cut these discs and then they lay them out in the field to bleach out for at least a year or so. Take them back, toast them on the Weber grill and char them, and then to some fancy calculation figure out surface area to volume of rye whiskey, what makes sense to give it the flavor and the color. And this is only 2 years old, 3 years old.
Okay.
And this one is one of my pretty dear to my heart. I mean, they all are. I really do like my rye whiskey. This one for 95.5 is out of Boston, so we're being from UConn, but not that far from there. Boston Harbor Distillery, one of my favorite local distilleries, an hour and 10 from my house. Also 95.5 rye.
The other one really quickly, the other one was
Yep.
Lock & Co., right?
Yeah, Lock & Co. out of
Okay.
Colorado Springs. Yep.
And the one you're talking about now is Putnam, right?
Yeah, yep. So all three are sourced, right? They're all from the same MGP distillery, but each one has a totally different flavor profile, which is what's really cool, right? Because people are like, oh, well, I don't like rye. I go, well, you just haven't met the right rye. And that's why I have so many ryes here, because these are all my favorite ryes. And then some. I can only fit these bottles in my suitcase before I came up here. But what's nice about this is it's like making meatballs, let's say, right? You have a certain recipe, you make it, but some people make it a little bit differently. And so, talk about, oh, that is really good for that reason. And whiskey has the same thing that, and these days, at least at least the people that come buy whiskey from me, we talk about the different nuances because of how somebody does something a little bit different. And that's why even though it's the same recipe, that's a base recipe, whether it's your terroir, your barrels that you use, where you store them, and all of that makes all the difference. And whether you proof them down or not, makes all the difference how it tastes. So way too much about this whiskey now, but anyway.
So no, it's
cheers.
all right. It's all right. It's all good. One quick thing though, Irene, and you actually warned me in advance of this. I actually just got a note. If you can just slow down just a little bit. We were talking about, I've never met Irene when she wasn't at a high rate of speed, and this is actually medium. Irene, she said. So
this is medium.
Laughing about that. So, so if you don't mind me checking on you every a couple seconds, if that pops up.
Absolutely. Yep.
Great, just so we can kind of make sure everybody's kind of digesting, pun intended, I guess, the right information that we're going with.
Sure.
Here. So.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to be starting with the Wheelhorse, then the Rossville, and then we're going to be doing the Whistle Pig.
Whistle Pig. Yes.
All right,
yep.
Perfect. All right. So that being said, being a whiskey sommelier, I mean, I think one of the important things here is that prior to getting tasting of all these things, I think the important thing is to understand the best way that we should be tasting this. So what are some of the things that we should probably be understanding or taking in while we're, getting ready to taste this? I mean, why don't we start with the Wheelhorse and just jump right in, if that's all right with you?
Yeah, sure. So I have some Wheelhorse here. So if you just got a bottle of Wheelhorse or any 95.5 rye that you have, whether it be Bullet or whatever, fresh, new, open bottle, open it for a little while, swirl it around your glass before you taste it. And as a reason for that, because usually depends on the distillery, if they dump the barrels, the whiskey from barrels, and if they don't sort of let it rest in a vessel for a while, say a month or whatever, which a lot of places don't, then what happens is this, there's all the volatile stuff that's going on in the barrel that literally if you pump it to a bottle and then bottle it, to me, it's not the best way to enjoy a whiskey, right? Because there's like all these other things that kind of waft off a little while, some off notes, whatever. So definitely open your bottle, pour some in a glass, and then kind of let it sit for a little while. If you don't have enough time or patience to, then have 2 glasses or use a wine aerator, which is what I do in my store all the time. So put it through the wine aerator or just kind of, do one of these, right? Because that does get some air in it. And then you can actually, it actually smells much more pleasant. But also the high, whatever proof alcohol does tend to waft off a little bit, so that when you put your whiskey glass to your nose, it's not the first thing that hits you is this waft of ethanol, right? So because this is kind of high proof for most people, 101, definitely kind of go a little easy. And I don't know what you guys have for whiskey glasses. These are the regular big size Glencairns. I have the minis, and people always ask me that. The minis to me, sort of restricts the alcohol from coming out as a blast, so you can actually smell and taste your whiskey a little bit better. And as far as so like with these, I kind of tend to kind of smell them from here because there's a bit of alcohol that I can smell. But with this, when I'm trying to buy a single barrel, it has to be just right. It has to smell right, taste right, and all of that. So I tend to like to dig my nose in it, and you can't really do that with the big glasses. Not like wine, right? With wine, you can like put your face in it, put your nose in it, and smell it all.
Right.
With
I never
something,
did that before. I never actually, because I always was told stick your nose in there. You'll get that hit of ethanol, so don't swirl
yep,
too much. But
yep,
I can actually pick up different notes by sitting right here.
exactly, right. And then kind of, it's a rye. To me, like a classic rye has, it's actually smells sweeter than a bourbon, which is kind of weird. And you definitely get the hint of the spice. Sometimes you get a little citrus. Occasionally you get a little grassiness right off the bat. And your very first sip should be the tiniest sip ever. So unless you've been drinking all day already, which I hope you haven't, the very first sip should be the smallest sip ever to introduce your palate to this new kind of higher proof whiskey. And then the second sip, after you kind of, go, okay, this is what I'm going to taste. The second sip, I would say, take a slightly bigger sip and then swish it around your entire palate to kind of taste different things. And what you'll find is, I always say, don't look at the label, just taste it and discover what parts of your palate are tasting different things. Because spice can appear on the right-hand side, left-hand side, sweetness generally up front, and then a lot of pepper spices in the back. It's on either side towards the back. And then the third sip is when you actually really taste the whiskey, like all the things you need to know about the whiskey. And how do you tell it's a good one is when the nose kind of follows the palate and it has a good finish. That's sort of my criteria. So.
All right. Well, cheers, UConn. You heard the instructions. Let's get to it.
Right, so I know everyone else is getting, depending on what you're drinking for rye. To me, this is a really kind of nice, like a citrusy sweetness right up front. And then kind of mid palate, it's not the longest finish, but it's okay because for a $30 bottle, I can sip it or I can put it in a cocktail without worrying about it.
Sure.
Right. So so for me, when my criteria is someone using a cocktail, it still has to be a good tasting rye, but it doesn't have to have as long a finish unless you're gonna make a whiskey sour, and we can get into that a little later.
All right, so I did my second. So now I should be able to taste all the whiskey here on this next one.
Yeah, so see if you're tasting like spice on the right side, the left side, or in the middle. Like you really do taste different things. And what's really kind of fun that I do a lot of times, because I like to geek it out, is I actually will put in a spreadsheet of all the tasting notes, because I want to be able to revisit this whiskey a week from now, 2 weeks from now, and then taste it and see if I can actually pick it out. Am I getting the same notes? And sometimes you are, sometimes you're not, depending on the whiskey.
So is it safe to assume that as the bottle opens up, we are able to develop and kind of sense new flavor profiles and new aromas?
You generally you do, especially with something that's slightly higher proof. If you're opening a bottle that's only 80 proof, for me at least, by the time it gets to be a halfway, it starts to fall apart, right? So whatever alcohol has already, it's already escaped, and you're like, all right, so because the alcohol does carry the flavor. And if the alcohol is gone, then you're not going to get the flavor, and you're like, all right, this is kind of a dud at this point. So at that point, just make a cocktail, invite some friends over, polish up the bottle, and buy a new one.
Well, I'm getting a chat message here to everybody. Looks like somebody missed the tasting list. Just grab your favorite bottle of whiskey or rye and join us. It doesn't matter which one you have at this point. You'll enjoy, you'll learn something with Irene along the way. So don't worry about that. So Irene, you just mentioned this, and this is funny. So Irene and I were chatting a long time ago. I picked up this bottle when I was doing some work in Ireland a number of years ago. I could not get myself to drink the last amount. So I probably have a third of the bottle left, but it's a 12-year-old bottle. So clearly, as Irene has informed me and kind of just did now, if you've got one of those older bottles and you just don't want to let that last drop go because it's so good, what do you do? What do you suggest at this point? Because you talked about it starting to fall off after that 50% mark or so.
Yeah, so if you get a bottle that you really, really like and you want to save it for a future time to taste it in its prime, so to speak, highly suggest getting those 2-ounce or 4-ounce bottles, depending on how much you want to save. As soon as you open that bottle, fill it with, with the whiskey to the top, but buy the ones with the polycone tops, because if you buy the ones that with a glued paper, bad things happen. If a high proof whiskey gets behind the glue, then you're tasting glue, and it's not a good thing. It's happened to me a couple of times, and I learned to just buy the polycones a little bit more. Let's say 30 cents for a cap or whatever. But hey, you're talking about expensive bottle of whiskey, so why not? So then just label it. Do a 2-ounce to a 4-ounce. I usually, if it's a really special bottle, I literally will put 8 ounces away, and then enjoy the rest and share with friends and stuff like that. Because no matter what, I know I have 8 ounces of really amazing whiskey.
Right.
I can taste much further down the line.
Right.
But
Right.
for most whiskeys, unless they're super special, whiskeys not meant to be collected. Unless you're in a different, unless you're collecting for a different reason, right? To me, having an important bottle of whiskey is for sharing. So what I have here later when we get to this Whistle Pig, this is the 15-year that I blended. This last year, I think we sold for like $265. So it's not a everyday whiskey, but at the end of the day, you need to taste it with people and share it with them, because then you can always have the memory of sharing a really good whiskey with people. Like, oh, remember the time we had whatever. You don't want them to drink it when you're like, oh, you're not there to share with them anymore. So no matter what word of advice, always share your whiskey, open it, no matter how expensive it is, share it and have a good time with it.
No, that makes perfect sense. So I want to go backwards a little bit if we can. You talked a little bit about the requirement to being a rye. You mentioned 51% rye has to be in the mash bill. Is there anything else that comes from that? Is there amount of aging that has to go on for a rye, say, versus something else?
Yeah, so to be called a straight rye, it has to be a minimum of 2 years.
Okay.
Otherwise, you and then you can put the age statement on it to say how old it is and stuff like that. But one of the interesting things I found about rye is one of the few grains that you can actually drink it a lot younger. Bourbon generally, and especially Scotch, because of the terroir that the aging and stuff like that, you need a little bit more age on it. But rye, because it's so pungent and it's so exciting on the palate, right? I always equate it to like your cornbread drinker, your cornbread eater, or your pumpernickel eater, right? Me, I love my pumpernickel because there's so much more going on. There's the spice and there's the anise and all of that. Whereas cornbread is nice and sweet and butter is all good, but it doesn't have as many dimensions. And so rye's that way, and that's why as a young whiskey, you can drink it and it's good.
Okay, all right, makes sense. And is it similar to bourbon? Is it charred in charred new oak barrels, or is it something else?
New oak barrels, yeah, and yes, new oak barrels. Yep.
Okay, so we talked about this. I know you said you flunked history, so this is where I think I come in a little bit, right? So, well, what's the story? What's the story behind rye? Why was it so popular, and what happened? You know a little bit about this, so
yeah. So I mean, rye was kind of like the whiskey until. Even George Washington had his own distillery, right? But when after Prohibition started, when the U.S. government started subsidizing the corn farmers, right? And all of a sudden it's like, oh man, we can just make this because it's so much cheaper to make it, and that's kind of made it kind of sort of fall apart for that reason. But man, they're making rye since. There's all different dates on when they make it. I'm not good with history, but
I found 17th century was really when it came in, but that was on the history thing. I mean, so
yeah, 17 and the 1800s. Some people made it, and then Maryland and I believe Maryland, Pennsylvania, I think, were like the states there were kind of known for their their variety of rye, and some of it is also because of the variety of rye, right? So in the wine world, we talk about terroir and the grapes and all that. And this is something I don't think they've explored enough yet, but the craft distilleries now in America are starting to do that, to say, hey, if you grow like a winter crop versus a summer crop, when if you harvest them and where you grow them, it really does make a difference, right? Because certain varieties of rye can give up the sugar a little bit more the starches, so it's easy, it's more fermentable. So there's whole, kind of like barley, same thing.
Yeah.
They're always trying to find different ones, but it's always fun when it's a local one.
Okay. Very nice. Very nice. So I guess the other question I have here is what caused the downfall? Was it prohibition of rye? I mean, we're seeing a resurgence now, so obviously there's a little bit coming back now, but was
Yeah,
it prohibition that was it, or was another spirit that kind of came in the way?
well, no, it was kind of bourbon. Bourbon kind of got in the way, right?
Okay.
Because it was subsidized.
Yeah.
And also people always think of rye as your grandfather's drink or your great grandfather's drink, right? Whereas bourbon's kind of the new cool kid on the block. But yes, I would say definitely seen a resurgence in the last few years, especially with a lot of craft cocktail bars and stuff like that. They're like, wait a minute, this is a way better substrate for us to make cocktails with.
Okay. All right. Well, what's the second whiskey we should be trying at this point?
So the second one is a really cool one because I wanted to kind of showcase different rye recipes. And if you were able to get Pikesville rye was it's out of Heaven Hill. It was an inexpensive rye, but all of a sudden, nothing, you can't get anything anymore. And it's more, it's 51% corn. 51% rye, and then the majority of the rest of it is corn. So it becomes a much more approachable rye for bourbon drinkers. But this Rossville Union rye is also MGP rye, amazingly. But they decided that, we should stop selling a really good white dog to other people and make our own. So this is their own label. But what I like about this was it's 51% rye and 49% malted barley. So if you're a Scotch drinker, all of a sudden you're like, oh, say what? Right? There's no corn in it, so there's none of that. I hate to say the corniness, but there is that corn note that you don't get in this at all.
Sure.
And it was funny because I had one of my customers who's a huge Scotch drinker and very, very picky. He taught me quite a bit about, single malt whiskeys and stuff like that. And I go, you got to try this. He goes, I don't have time. I'm look, just humor me, all right? If you hate it, just toss it. I won't be offended. And as soon as he's tasted it, I'm like, you like that, right? Because of the malt in it.
Sure.
But
well,
not all.
Just looking at the color profile alone, I mean, it's drastically different.
Yeah, so this is about 6 years old. I believe this one is only about it's a blend of 2 to 4 year old. So this one's definitely at least 6 years old. And this is a much higher proof. This is 119.9, so essentially 120 proof.
Boy.
But yet, if you manage to get a bottle to taste, doesn't taste anything like it. Like it's 120 proof at all, but no. So if you were to get a Rossville Union out in some other store, it wouldn't be the same mash bill because they have different mash bills for a Rossville Union. They gave me 2 or 3 different mash bills. I picked this one because it was so unique because of the barley note in it. It's sort of kind of
the one that you sold me was a single.
Yeah, it's a single barrel.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
yeah,
what we're tasting
different.
may be different with what other folks are pulling across.
Probably. Yeah, but that's okay. I mean, so tasting, people always talk about tasting notes. It's like, what do you taste? What do you smell? Right now is as what do you taste? Because tasting and nosing is so tied to your experience. So let's say if you grew up in a different country, a foreign country, and you were exposed to a bunch of different fruits and stuff, or vegetables, or whatever, that if you didn't live in that country, you wouldn't know. So like for me, I taste certain things, I go, oh, that tastes like, whatever fruit that I grew up with. And they're like, what is that? But it's very unique to that because it's so linked to memory. So.
Okay. All right.
So what do you think of this one? Is this the first time you're tasting it, Josh?
Yeah, this is the first time I'm trying this one.
Definitely
has a little more heat on the nose, on the front. I can definitely get that. Like even though I'm doing the new thing that you taught me here, and be a little further back, I'm still getting a little fire in there.
Oh yeah, it's definitely there. But you've got a big glass, though, right? You don't have my small glass. You do.
I'm saving my Whisky Mentors glass for a special occasion.
There's plenty more where they came from, though, so you should use them.
So I just got a question asking really quickly if I can. So I'm just going to bring this up. So the first one we tasted here was the Wheelhorse Rye. So the question was as well as to what other ones would substitute if you couldn't find this. Irene, if you remember, we went back and forth because there was a few folks that had some trouble finding this. And what Irene told me was number one, the Bullet Rye would actually be a good substitute because it's also that 95.
It is. Yes, for 95.5.
Recommend?
Well, Putnam Rye. If you're in the New England area, this is my single barrel, so obviously can't get that because I sold my last bottle a couple of days ago. But they're 46 ABV rye, which with a white label is 95.5. So that would be a good option. Let's see who else makes 95.5. Well, you probably can't get this either,
Yeah.
but actually some stores can have this. That's also 95.5.
Well, there's a
So
lot of, I mean, that's the Aspen one specifically, but Lock and Co, there's a ton of those that are being distributed around New England nowadays. So
yeah, yep, definitely. But most of those are the core versions. So I'm because I'm single barrel buyer, I always like, because literally there is to me a taste difference, right?
sure.
Because now you're not at the regular proof that they put out there in a core product, but now you're like talking cask strength, which then means more alcohol, which means if it's a, not always, but obviously if it's a single barrel that I picked it not because of the high proof, I picked it because of the flavor. So the high alcohol in that one, it was 132 proof, carried all of the flavors. And once you get over the initial heat, then you're just actually going to taste all the delicious flavors
Sure.
in it.
One question came in here or in the comments here. Somebody found that they couldn't find Wheel Horse, so they picked up a Rabbit Hole. Is that something that you would recommend as a comparable?
Yes. Oh, yes. I definitely. Rabbit Hole is definitely up and coming distillery. I love what they make. Trying to get a single barrel from them as a retailer. I love that they do single barrels. But if I were to own a distillery, I wouldn't have a single barrel program.
And for those
It's
that
nightmarish.
are talking, we're on Rossville Union right now, and Ellen out there who's talking about the Rabbit Hole as well. I just dropped in an acronym that folks might not be familiar with: BIB, Bottled in Bond. Irene, you probably know a little bit about the Bottled in Bond Act. So what's
Yeah. Yep. So bottled in bond, it's something that it meets a certain set of requirements because people were just selling crap, right? They weren't like it wasn't whatever the alcohol level was. They never tested or anything like that. So bottled in bond made it so that the legit players were able to put this stuff out there. So it's a few different criteria. I believe you have to be 4 years old, and you have to be 100 proof. And it was funny that you brought that up because today we were tasting the Whistle Pig portfolio, and they had a bottle in barn. I don't see one here.
Bottled in
And it's
Barn?
kind
I
of
love
tongue,
it.
but it kind of tongue in cheek, and they made it 100.1 proof,
Oh,
and the
wow.
TTB passed it, and then they recanted.
Wow.
They go, you can't do that. So, but it came about because of it was just trying to control quality.
Yeah.
Right, because
Sure.
I mean people used to go blind drinking, White Dog and stuff like that, so it was a way for them to do that.
Yeah, one of my favorite Bottled in Bonds out there, and some people out there might laugh, but it's actually Old Granddad. It's actually one
Yes.
of the more it's just solid. I mean, you can't go wrong with an Old Granddad. Now I know we're talking bourbon versus rye here, but obviously there's probably much more availability of bourbon in Bottled in Bond than there is rye at this time. So.
That would be correct. Although E.H. Taylor used to have one, bottle and bond rye, and this I would say probably maybe 5 years ago, and we had tons of it in the shelf. Nobody was buying it. I'm like, what's wrong with you? This is amazing tasting rye. And then all of a sudden, because now the Sazerac is gonna dial
Well,
back what they allocate. Now we can't get it anymore. I haven't seen a bottle and bond rye from them in ages.
I don't think anybody's really seen an E.H. Taylor in ages, unless you're at the right place at the right time or know the store owner. And no, I know the store owner, folks, but I don't have an E.H. Taylor.
You can come to my show September 17th when I do my annual charity event.
That's right.
Plenty of fun stuff out there for people to
That's
buy.
right.
So
That's right. So what notes should we be, from your perspective, what are some of the standard notes that we should be pulling from this Rossville?
So this Rossville, because of the malt, I get like a dark chocolate note in the back.
That's exactly what I had. Yeah.
Cheers, got a good palate. I like that. Yeah, I mean in the front, you definitely you can tell it's a rye because it's got that just a hint of the citrusy and spice, right? And what I like about this is because of the malt, however they process it, aged and all of that, is that it doesn't have the grassy notes. Because some ryes, which I won't name, because it's not fair to them, have a really grassy note, and it happens. I mean, even I love Whistle Pig, but every once in a while I come across one that's really grassy. I'm like, don't need that, right? And so it's kind of like not even cut hay. Cut hay is kind of nice. It's more like somebody just mowed your lawn. It's still kind of green grass, and that's just not my thing.
You use that term a lot, the grassy term, and when you and I were chatting about different ones, that came up quite a bit. So literally, it's almost like lawn shavings you're talking about, like that smell when you cut the lawn, or
that kind of very vegetal kind of note. And you rarely find it in the bourbon. It's such a rye thing,
What
Like I
causes that? Is it because of the type of crop or what?
no, I think it's just I hate to say it's probably in the fermentation
Okay.
process,
Okay.
right? Because everything that you want to get out of your grain, if your yeast does not produce the proper taste notes that you want, I would imagine that's where it comes from. But yeah, hey, I'm no distiller. I just play around with some of them,
Well, you
but
are a master blender at this point, I mean, right? I mean, come on.
I could say that. I have fun blending because it is really fun. I mean, like when I was at my Whistle Pig portfolio tasting, I was like blending. I was go, what are you doing? I was trying it, see what it tastes like, right? Because some is missing a certain note for me, so it's slightly shorter finish. And so to me that's why I love to blend because it's like cooking, right? If you like to cook, you don't always necessarily just stick to the recipe, right? Because sometimes you're out of stuff. So you're like, well, what do I have in my, what do I have in my drawer? All right, I can make something out of that. And to me, whiskey is kind of the same way for me.
Gotcha. Now, somebody just dropped in. And I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this specific distillery. Catoctin Creek.
Catoctin Creek, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
That was close. All right, good.
Yeah. So
Somebody's
it's
drinking that, and it's 100% rye. I can imagine the
yep.
spice on that one.
Yeah, so Catoctin Rye, I actually used to have some of it. I believe they're 100% organic. Actually, I met the distillery owner, Becky, over the weekend when I was in Nolo. So this was probably 5-6 years ago now when I first brought it into my store. It tasted like they're a little bit green to me. Right, a lot of the stories start out that way, and they're a little bit green. They're a little bit green for a variety of reasons. One, it could be in the fermentation process. Two, it could be they're too young and the barrels are not well aged. So for me, the sort of the sweet spot is really 24 months. 24 months of aging barrel safe before you actually make a barrel, and then put whiskey in it. Because there's this tannins in the wood that if you kiln dry, and that was the process they were doing for a while when people were just hurrying up trying to get the whiskey out there. And I'm going, man, don't hurry up. Wait for the wood to do its thing first, right? Or use a used wine barrel because the wine would have pulled all the tannins out of it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I like what they're doing, that they're organic, all that. But if I recall, I haven't had one in a long time. It had kind of really kind of greenish notes.
Well, this
me.
person's drinking a barrel select, so clearly whatever the vendor was went through a similar process and like yourself and identified one that was good. There's no grass complaint here, so that's the good
All
thing.
right.
But you hit something on the head that I want to chat about real quick, and it's more of a personal favorite. But you mentioned wine barrels, right? I find a different complexity that really comes out of whatever spirit it is that's aged in a wine barrel. What is it that's, you talked about pulls all the tannins out? What is it that really changes the dynamic of your spirit if it's aged in a wine barrel or a tequila barrel or something else for that matter? Because obviously different finishes can happen.
Yeah, so that's a really good question because so distillers are trying to kind of one up each other and do different things, right? So I mean, you can sit around and wait for your whiskey, bourbon, or rye or Scotch to age till forever before it becomes good. So the sort of the new game is people are starting to finish that stuff, and if they do a good job of it, it can be really really nice. And I do have some barrel finishes that I absolutely love. Actually, this one here is a rye that's finished from Starlight. They just won all kinds of crazy awards at the American Craft Distiller Association. This one's finished it's 4 years old,
At your
and then it
Armagnac?
was Armagnac cask, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I've tasted some whiskeys that people have beautiful Armagnac casks and they put bourbon in it. I'm like, it doesn't do it justice, right? Armagnac barrels are not cheap, neither are port barrels. Port barrels you can do with either rye or bourbon, and it can be really nice because basically once the wine's set in the barrel for a while, right, it pulls the tannins out, but it also leaves the flavor of the wine in the barrel. So when you put a whiskey in it, the whiskey, depending on how much time you put it, tries to pull some of those flavors out. And so now you have it's like cooking with different spices, right? And those spices are in the barrel. I tasted some Armagnac cask from bourbon, and I'm like, man, you just wasted that barrel. What do I know, right? I don't know the distillery, but that's what I'm tasting. And what's fun is this is also a rye that's finished in a tawny port cask. So same age, spend same amount of time, but flavor profile like night and day, right? So in the Armagnac cask, Starlight's out of Indiana, family's making wine and brandies for years. This and I name all my barrels. So this one's not named stewed fruit. So when I tasted it, what the Armagnac, because Armagnac, if you know, is like cognac, but from Armagnac can be called cognac, because of the sweeter notes, gave it like a stewed. I named it stewed fruit. So it has all those kind of stone fruit notes in it. But the same rye in port cask, Tawny port cask, not ruby port, added this chocolate note. Like I had somebody taste this the other day, I'm like, oh my God, all it smells like dark baking chocolate.
Sure.
So it's really, really cool that the finishes really showcase, highlight different parts of the whiskey, of the base whiskey.
Okay. And for those that are out there wondering what Armagnac is, it's a type of brandy that's produced in Southwest France. It's a very specific type that has a unique flavor profile and distinctness and sweetness to it that can really enhance, to Irene's point, the rye flavor that you're talking about here. So, I mean, we've got about 22 minutes left here, Irene. I think, like you and I talked about, I think the winner, yeah, there it is. So we've talked about, and our folks out here have the Whistle Pig piggyback. So let's get to the Whistle Pig concepts here. You are at Whistle Pig Distillery right now. You're in one of their, specific little, what would you call it? The rumpus room, as they told you?
The rumpus room. Yes, the rumpus room. This is where
that
they
makes
have a bar.
sense, right? The rumpus room.
Yeah.
I think folks are excited. Piggyback has really come onto the map and exploded, or it's not Piggyback, Whistle Pig, I should say, has exploded onto the map. I mean, we've seen, just from Rye alone, I know you and I were talking about this, that between 2015 and 2016, Rye alone, the demand increased 33% from really the highest jump it's seen since the start, since Prohibition was lifted. So I think, Whistle Pig is really capturing, a market here that's ripe for the picking. So what are we tasting when we get into this piggyback here?
So piggyback is actually, I do love the piggyback. It's Dave Pickerel, who was one of who was the master distiller, who unfortunately passed on. Brilliant man. So this is actually a tribute to him, because regular Whistle Pig 10-year is from Alberta. It takes a while for it to do its thing. They age it for 6 years in a new oak barrel, and then they finish it for the next 4+ years in an ex-bourbon barrel. So it makes regular Whistle Pig 10-year very approachable to bourbon drinkers. But Whistle Pig was created because Dave wanted something that it's even shaped so that it's easy to pour and all. It's made for the bars and the cocktail world, and affordable. So half the price of this. And there's actually a little bit of Dave in every part of this label. The proof on it is 96.56, 56 the year he was born. The day that he died is on here. So there's a lot of Dave in this bottle. So this bottle is also very dear to my heart, because Dave I learned a lot from this man. Pretty amazing stuff.
If you had known him.
Yeah. And then also the pig, if you look at a bunch of different pigs, some of them have like the kind of like the top hat. This one actually has a Stetson, because that's what Dave wore. So things that people don't pay attention to, you're looking about, wait a minute, that's a pig with a different hat. So so it's made to be really, really easy sipping. I was very fortunate when this first came out. I was at Whistle Pig picking I can't remember which barrel number now. Now I'm on number 9, I think. Yeah, I'm on number 9.
Number 9.
Wow. Or maybe number 10 if I find 2 tomorrow. But that was the year that they were just getting to release piggyback. So I got the very first piggyback. So
very nice.
And piggyback's easy. Oh my God, it's so easy to sip. It's like it's got a nice kind of caramelly, vanilla note to it, and it's high enough proof. It's not quite 100, but it's high enough proof that you can definitely sip it as an easy sipper, or I'll put it in a cocktail. It'll stand up in a cocktail really nicely.
Awesome. I actually am lucky enough, because I live down the street from Irene, funny enough, so I have the ability to go to her shop whenever I please, which I know makes some of you jealous here now that you know a little bit more about Irene. But I have her single barrel pick sitting here that I've shared with Sam, and both of us are going to be sampling tonight. So it is distinctly different, to your point, price wise, and it is a little bit in terms of flavor profile. So before we jump into that, what would you say in terms of some of the flavor profiles that we would find that would be distinct from your bottle versus, say, the piggyback? Or just the 10-year in general. I think we have to generalize there, because obviously yours is very specific.
Yeah. So number one, this is much higher proof. So this one is about 116. Yes, 50. Yeah, 115.6. So number one, generally the single barrel selections of at least 110, generally from 110 to 120. Occasionally get a little bit above. But it's I pick it as I pick with other barrels. It to me, a rye whiskey has to have sort of classic rye nose. You know, it has to have the nice kind of lemony, orangey, kind of citrusy note. It has to be sweet, has to have a little bit of vanilla in it, a little bit of caramel, even though you find some of those notes in bourbon. But this Whistle Pig, because it finished its life in an ex-bourbon barrel, so it was able to capture some of those notes, which is very, very cool. And I picked this particular one. This one's called a Steak Companion. So in general, if you follow me on Instagram at all, whatever, it's not lately, but I've been posting like food pairings and stuff like that. Because people always think of only pairing a wine with food, but man, whiskey pairs so well with food too. So occasionally you'll see me do a dual pairing, right? I'm gonna have a steak and I'm gonna have this big bowl cab, and then at the same time I'm gonna have my steak companion. So the reason I call this one a steak companion is up front you kind of go, oh, this is kind of nice and sweet. It's kind of caramelly, it's almost bourbony, and then you exactly right, and then you taste it, and then like mid palate, like literally like cut off, mid palate, this spice comes on, right? Like a black pepper spice that comes on, and it's just like, whoa, what just happened there? But yet it's not a spice where you think of high proof alcohol that just kind of bites you. This doesn't. And why I called it the steak companions, because I don't know how you eat your steaks, but I eat my steaks I just salt and pepper my steaks usually. So when I do it with a rye like this, that really has a pepper note, I just salt and pepper. I salt both sides, pepper one side, and then when you chew, imagine chewing like a really juicy. If you're vegetarian, I apologize. I used to be for 27 years, but it's really juicy, a ribeye steak, right? And you're chomping on it, and you when you go to swallow it, you wash it down with this, and the whiskey provides that nice spice in the back, and it just it makes for a really good harmony for food and
all I know is
beverage.
that I'm hungry now and I need to go find a ribeye. So obviously that's very specific to this here. Are there differences between? I know you mentioned this a little bit, where the piggyback was designed as a cost effective for the customer. It's something that can easily stand up in a cocktail for the bar folks that would be mixing things. What else should we know about Whistle Pig at this point? I mean, obviously you're there, so let's learn a little bit more about Whistle Pig.
Okay. Yeah.
Besides the piggyback and the 10-year.
So there's a 10-year, then there's a 12-year, which is slightly lower proof, actually a lot lower proof, 86 proof. But this is a blend, and I may have to do a blend tomorrow, depending on what I find. It is a blend of port finish, Sauterne, and brain fart, port Sauterne and Madeira. And the standard is six. Yeah, the standard is 68% Madeira. So there's certain parameters you can play with. This is a really easy sipping one. It's got some really, really, if people, they don't like rye, you just give them this and they're like, oh, I love rye now, right? Because it's easy sipping.
Yeah, but how much is that bottle is the question.
So it used to be $120. I don't know what it's going to cost now, because I know the price went up quite a bit. And then this, which is my favorite, well, over this is the regular 15-year, which is also 92 ABV.
Okay.
92 proof, sorry. 40, bad math, 46. Versus this, I got to blend pre-pandemic. Was up here 2.5 years ago. This is 117.7. Even though it says barrel number 2405, majority of 70% of the whiskey in here is from that barrel. The rest was another barrel. So I came out here to buy a cask strength Whistle Pig 15, which is very rare. They don't usually have them, but I was very lucky pre-pandemic to be able to come up here to buy a barrel. I didn't like the offerings. I said, can I blend? And let me blend, and the rest is history. This bottle is amazing. So 15-year is a not finished, but it spent the first 6 years of its life also in a new oak barrel. Comes from Alberta. Oh, good note too, that this used to always come from MGP, like these guys, but now I just got that corrected. It says made in Canada, which it is now, because since 2 years ago, because MGP has no new stock, so all of that comes now from Alberta. But anyway, so back to this. So this, what was I saying about it? So I
blending, you were talking about Alberta, where it came from.
Yeah. So the rest of so 6 years old in a new barrel, and then the rest of the time it's spent in Vermont oak. So that's what I was trying to get to. Vermont oak's kind of really important. So if you think of oak trees, um, where they grow, so in Vermont they grow much slower, so they drop a lot more rings, versus say in Missouri or wherever where it's warmer and the rings are wider, which means that if you know your trees and stuff like that, the oak trees there are almost better for, there's more cellulose, so actually better more for making paper. But it's much tighter here, and it's because of the terroir here, you get a lot of orange, like burnt orange notes in it, which is very distinctive of the 15-year for me. So.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Obviously, you know, in the world of bourbon and in the world of spirits right now, you know that there's all these people chasing unicorns, as we call them. And obviously, Whistle Pig is no exception. They have their own as well that are very, very limited. Talk to me about what we should know about the Boss Hog.
I love the Boss Hog. So people, well, is it worth the $500 or whatever the hell it costs?
$500.
Well,
Oh my goodness.
yeah, I think now it might be $550 or whatever. So every Boss Hog is very different. Yeah, who knows what it'll cost this year, right? Probably they had to truck it down to me. So Boss Hog is a super limited edition. It was Dave's way of really truly experimenting and doing different things with it. I never had the first one. I have the second and third one. Very lucky to have met Dave when he created the fourth one, which is the Black Prince, and that won all kinds of crazy awards. And that was finished in Armagnac cask, and that's when I learned. I'm like, holy crap, Rye and Armagnac cask is a match made in heaven, right? And so it's an annual release, very few bottles, because he basically selects like the top X amount of barrels that they have of rye that tastes really good. Then they finish it in different barrels. So 4 was an Armagnac cask, 5 was in a Calvados cask. And just a side note, 5 is very dear to my heart, even though 4 is my favorite, one of my favorites taste wise. They passed away when they released 5, and 5 came in a casket. It was for Mauve. Mauve was one of the 2 pigs that they have here on the farm. Mortimer was the first one, Mauve was the second one, and Mauve loved apples, and I was just one of those crazy things that, you know, it's like you couldn't have planned it that way. Number 6 was Samurai. Samurai was finished in, I believe, a Japanese plum cask. It was Japanese, some Japanese influence, that's hence the Samurai. But 7 is my next favorite, because 7 was finished in was half. It was called the Magellan. So half of the cask was from Spain, and so then they took the Atlantic trip down to Brazil, and it was Brazilian teakwood, which is Ambarana. And that was a barrel I picked up when I came in to blend my 15. Amazing stuff. And people taste it like, what is that? It tastes so good. Only 86 proof, and it's amazing. So if you're lucky enough to show up at my event this year on September 17th, I might give up one of my bottles so that people can actually taste it as part of the charity event, because it is truly, truly amazing. So that's why Boss Hog is so special.
I was going to say, how long is it aged? Or
so it depends. Usually it's a bunch of years. So the whole Boss Hog line, I don't know about now that Dave's not here anymore, but the entire Boss Hog line has been thought out. Like they already know like several years ahead, right? Because it has to age in those barrels for a while. And so what was fun for me was when I bought the last of the Ambarana barrel, they said, hey, you can only buy a half barrel because the other half is going to Boss Hog. So that's why, you know, it's pretty special that way. Yeah. So this year I believe it's last year was a rum cask, I think. Philippines and somewhere a bunch of other, you know, Pacific type places.
Really quickly, folks, we've got about 8 or 9 minutes left of tonight. I know we're talking a little bit about Whistle Pig, given that Irene's logged in and broadcasting from Whistle Pig with us tonight. If you got questions, now's the time to definitely throw those in the Q&A so we can get to those. And Irene and I will try to get to as many of those and answer as many of those questions as we can based on the knowledge that we have. But Irene, if you can, I thought one of the cool things that you were talking to me about with your experience with Whistle Pig, talk to me about your process in selecting a single barrel. I mean, we talked about it, 74, 75 barrels at this point. When you walk into a distillery, why is it different? What's the process here? And why is it that finding a single barrel is so crucial to your mission and what you do?
So for me, I never need a barrel because I have many of them. I want the barrel, right? So when I pick a barrel, it's because it has a unique flavor. So most of my customers tell me your barrels are definitely different than anybody else's because it has an extra edge. Sometimes because I taste something in a certain distillery's whiskey that says, you know what, they're almost there, not quite there yet, but I'm gonna help showcase them because I think
Sure.
they're gonna, go places with it. So I mean, there's no secret. I mean, it's basically for me, I need to pick a whiskey that has a good nose, which means it has to smell really good, has to have a really really good palate. That's most important,
Mm.
and then has to have a nice finish because short tasting whiskey, meaning if you taste it, it smells good, you taste it, it's pretty nice on the palate, and then you swallow it and you're like, wait, what happened to my whiskey? That's great for you. You're gonna make cocktails with it, right? But no, not really. But for me, it has to have a good palate. So in fact, I actually coined this thing when I was here at Whistle Pig a few years ago. My third barrel pick from Whistle Pig. I was up here. I had 5 barrel samples, and the first one I was so enamored by because the nose was amazing, right? But the palate was so short. I'm like, but I love barrel D because they had such great palate. So I go, okay, I'm gonna buy D. And I said, all right, nose you date, right? Because nose is so fleeting, right? You smell it and it's gone because your nose does get tired. But palate you marry because palate, you're gonna pour the whiskey, you're gonna drink for an hour or two, right? So you want to stay with that. And so that to me, more important than the nose. It's great it has all three, but to me, it has to have 2 and 3.
So
You
your
know,
nose you're dating, your
yeah,
palate you're married.
yes.
I've never heard that before, but I love it.
I made that one up, yeah, a few years ago.
Make sure you trademark that and throw that up on your website.
I probably should. Mm.
No, that's awesome. So we talked about blending a little bit, and you were talking about this you may end up doing that depending on what you find tomorrow.
Mhm.
I think it's important, number one, to talk a little bit about how whiskey, bourbon, rye all end up tasting the same, right? I mean, that's the thing. I mean, your single barrels are definitely unique for a reason, but how is it
Mhm.
that, let's use example, right? I mean, Whistle Pig can, distribute piggyback everywhere
Mhm.
across the country and have this
Yep.
mass amount of them. And how do they all have a similar flavor?
Yeah, so that is the magic of blending, right? So you need whoever's in your blending team, pretty consistent agreement that these are the notes that this whiskey has, right? So and so you always try and strive for those notes wherever they are, whether it needs to have lemon, it has to have white pepper, it has to have a little orange zest in the front. So you find barrels that have that, and then you blend them together. I mean, it's some people don't, you know, but it is the trickiest thing is to blend it so it's always consistent.
Yeah,
Which, yeah, I mean, I hats off to the people that do such a good job blending scotches and whatever and bourbons and stuff and to make them so that they are always consistent. Me, if I'm blending, it's a one-off, right? Because to me, I want to find those special flavors, and you can never get them again. And that's half the fun for me. It's not making something always the same, which is great. You can do that, but it's all about, with my same single barrel program, is finding something that's unique and different so that people don't get, tired of the same thing.
sure. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think that I found incredibly unique about the aging process is that really you can have a rack house that's full of barrels, and
Hmm.
not one of them will taste the same to
Hmm.
the next one in some cases,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Because it's all
Definitely.
about where they're stationed, heat, humidity, temperatures. I mean, how high
Yep.
they are in the rack house, how low they
Yep.
are, how far
Yep.
back against the wall they are versus the
Hmm.
middle. It's such a
Yep.
unique thing.
It is. And also the thing that people kind of don't talk about, and that just having come from a Springbank school, also, I mean, it's relatively same temperature there, but things are heating up there. So the day that you ferment is also different, right? And
Mm.
while the maltings and stuff like it for barley, depending on temperature. So there are just little unique things. And every once in a while, all of those things come together in this beautiful package, and you get such a unique whiskey. I'm like, how can we not make
Mm.
that happen again?
Mm.
So it's a lot of it's basically an art and a
Yeah.
science. So.
We got a question that came in, and Bob is after my own heart here. I mean, one of the questions I had for you that I was hoping to ask is in line with this. Obviously, we are witnessing kind of a resurgence of the bourbon world right now. We
Mhm.
talked about unicorns, we talked about prices. You talked about E.H. Taylor earlier and how we can't find things that, just sat on the shelves for a long time.
Yep. Mhm.
Is rye the next big thing is the first question, and then I'll follow up after you answer that.
So I don't think rye is the next big thing. I think just really good spirits, right? So I mean, for years now, I've been in business since 2013, part-time. So that, oh, rum is the next big thing, gin is the next big thing. But no, to me, it's like really good, well-crafted spirits. To me, is the next big thing,
Okay.
right?
So
I
to
don't think it's
follow up
any
to
one
that,
category.
well, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, bourbon and scotch definitely, I think, hold the candles as of right now in terms of what people go on the hunt for. But the question here is, if we are going to see potentially a resurgence, in the rye world, and we talked about Boss Hog being 500, 550, things like that.
Yep.
What are some things that people might want to try to scoop up now, in case that does go that way? Let's just say it. Let's just say, for the sake of arguments, what are some good bottles that they probably should look at now? I mean, like, I laugh because what is it? Fred Mitnick advertised the seagrass barrel, and all of a sudden that started flying off the shelves. But it's been on the shelves from barrel
For a
distilling
while.
for a decade, right? And now all of a
Yes.
sudden those are flying off the shelf. So I laugh about some of those heavy hitters that are out there that do some ratings. What should we expect and what should we look for in the rye world?
So my advice is buy what you like, right? No matter what anybody else is saying. I mean, unless you're buying them to invest and flip, which then I don't want to know you. But if buy what you like to taste, right? And try different things, right? Go out there and try different things, because you may think you only like this particular style, but then go try something different and you might like that. So the whole thing of it is, we're not trying to buy whiskey to hoard and go, oh, I have all these special bottles, because man, any one of us could drop dead tomorrow, right? So, and never having tasted that whiskey. So advice is, buy what you like to taste and be adventurous. Don't just go, oh, I don't like this because you haven't had the right one. When people come to me and go, I don't like rye, I'm like, you haven't met the right rye, right?
Yeah.
And like a lot of Scotch drinkers come to me and they go, we don't like rye. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna make sure you leave at least 2 or 3 bottles, and generally they do. Because basically it's just trying to discover people's palates, and in my tasting room, there's no shame. You taste what you like, and you don't have to like every barrel I buy, obviously, and which is why I buy so many different ones with different palettes. It's all about letting yourself explore.
No, makes sense. Makes great sense. And I think, you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about explore and try something new and experience some different things. I think that's kind of the fun part of what we do with this series here. I mean, like I mentioned, this is the 5th one. I think we've done gin, rum, scotch, bourbon, and now rye. I mean, like I said to you the other day, Irene, when I was in to pick up these spirits, I said, all right, so here's my plans. Yeah, I want to see some new ones. So if anybody knows anyone out there that's a tequila expert, an Irish whiskey expert, Irene's also one of those, by the way. So we may have to have Irene back in a little bit. But sure. I mean, just name it, right? I mean, that's the fun part of what we do. It's like,
exactly,
we could not be here. There's a possibility we're not here tomorrow. So, if you always wanted to try this concept, this is a great opportunity. And I think that this really allows itself that way. And it sounds like, you have the same motto when folks walk into your store. And I can tell you folks, if you do get a chance to get out to Canterbury, I know that northeast corner, the quiet corner of Connecticut, it's very quiet and very rural, but at the same time, it's worth a field trip on a weekend if you want to check out some single barrels and some new things that might wet your whistle, to be legit about throwing the puns out there. But Irene's got a lot of them, and she's obviously, as you learned tonight, very educated in all these things. So Irene, a huge thank you for your taking some time out of your whirlwind adventure up at Whistle Pig, getting that next barrel in line that you're hoping to bring back to Canterbury.
Thanks. No, and if you guys do visit, if you're local enough, it's my hobby, so I'm not always there. So make an appointment with me, or I'm there Friday, Saturdays from 12 to 5. Sundays and summer I try to stay away, so but definitely make an appointment with me, because it's still my retirement hobby. So,
and I'm gonna, Irene, if it's all right with you, I'll drop your handle into the chat here.
Sure.
Folks, if you want, you can follow, and I need to drop it to everybody, not just the panelists here. Let me do that now. So folks, if you want, she's on Facebook. I think you said Instagram as well, right, Irene?
Yep. Yes.
And
no website.
No website, but she
does
website. Have a Facebook page. But I also will throw her email in here if you want to follow up with anything that she does. And it is whiskey without an E.
Yes, so whiskey without an E.
Because obviously when you're talking craft whiskey, usually it's without the E. So if there's anything else that you have that you want to follow up with, learn a little bit more about Whisky Mentors or Canterbury Liquors, you can go ahead and you can reach out to Irene. But thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Irene, for the time today and the experience. I think we've all found some new favorites that we're going to add to our bar and share with good friends. I think is the important message that I walked away with today.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks, guys, for stopping in and listening.
All right. Well, we appreciate everybody being with us today. Thank you all so much. We hope to see you all shortly, and enjoy your evening, and make sure you open that next bottle with friends. Take care, everyone.
Cheers.